Welcome to Rico 12. As you've probably guessed, I am not Justin B. My name is Silvio. I'm a recovering cocaine addict, and while he is taking a well-deserved summer break, I'm attempting the impossible in replacing the irreplaceable Justin B. Once again, my name is Silvio, and I'm an addict. Rico 12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers represent various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, those showing the common threads of recovery, no matter our addiction or affliction. Today's speaker for the 265th meeting is Cameron F., who has spoken on Rico 12 several times previously. To hear his previous shares, they can be found in meetings 2, 69, 94, 122, and 135. I'm excited to hear his experience, strength, and hope today on this topic. We will get to his talk and Q&A afterwards in just a minute. First, for some business. Rico 12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, connect more, or just hang out and learn and grow with us, you can check out the other podcasts and the show notes of the podcast, or by going to rico12.com and exploring them there. With Justin's permission, as we are pod buddies, I also run a recovery podcast. It's called 12 Steps and 12 Questions. So, plenty of pods here to support you in your recovery. Now, Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contribution helps us to continue our mission. If you would also like to support Rico 12 and become a spearhead, visit rico12.com/support or click on the links in the show notes and chat for one-time or monthly donation options. Your support makes a difference in keeping us sharing our message of recovery. We look forward each meeting receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Cameron F., and give a little background on him. Cameron F. has been a member of Cocaine Anonymous since November 21, 2003. As a Big Book sponsor, he has worked with all kinds of addicts from around the world. He facilitates a 12 Steps in 4 Hours workshop and has carried the 12-step message of recovery to well over 5,000 suffering addicts over the past 17 years. His recovery message: it only takes a few hours to learn the 12-step program and the rest of your life to practice it. Cameron, thank you so much for being here today. Take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Silvio. Appreciate that. Welcome everyone who's come on the channel. My name's Cameron. I'm a member of Cocaine Anonymous. I'm an alcoholic addict who doesn't drink or use, which you think about that. That's kind of a paradoxical thing for us to say who understand our step one. From the age of 20 to the age of 46, morning, noon, and night, I sought to get high or drunk. And there came a point when I wanted to stop and found that I couldn't stop. And all those secular human approaches failed to hold me in any kind of permanent sobriety. And somehow I just kept succumbing to the desire again and again and pursuing my love of alcohol and drugs because I loved the effect, to the gates of insanity or death. Yet as a member of Cocaine Anonymous, it's been now more than 20 years since I've drank or used. How is that possible when everything in my experience tells me I'll drink and use again? And I was fortunate enough to meet someone when I came into these rooms seeking some way of staying sober. I met an ex-problematic. He had a solution, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was armed with the facts about himself. And he won my entire confidence. It was like, hey, I'm like you, you're like me, but you don't do it anymore. And how is that possible? And we got discussing and looking into that, and it literally saved my life. Silvio's already mentioned a couple things about me. I'm a Big Book sponsor. I use the Big Book because of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it has specific instructions on how to work a 12-step program. It's as simple as following a recipe. And I love the recipe analogy, and most addicts get the recipe analogy. You follow the recipe. If it's a good recipe, you'll get something really good at the end of it. If you mess with it, it alters the outcome. I've worked with men, women, gays, lesbians, transgendered, black, white, Christian, Muslim. I work with all sorts of addiction patterns: alcohol and drugs, sex, love, fantasy, gambling, food, anorexia, bulimia, hoarding, codependency, and the list goes on and on. I take an any and all addiction approach to the solution for whatever addiction pattern may be ailing the prospect. As Sylvia already mentioned, I do a 12 steps, 4 hours workshop. We're actually doing one this Sunday, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've taken now to date, since May of 2007, over 12,000 participants through the workshop. I've personally worked with 450 prospects through a 7 to 10 day sponsorship instruction period where I use the 12-step workbook from the workshop. And in that period of time of 20 years of working with others, 47 are dead, 30 that I've worked with directly, 36 overdoses and substance-related, health-related deaths, 9 suicides, and 2 were murdered. That seems to be the MO of the untreated addict. It's like the MO of a porn star. You know, when I grew up in the 80s, when porn, all the porn stars of the 80s, they're either overdosed, suicide, or murdered. And the drug addict's life is very similar. So Sylvia mentioned that it only takes a day to learn how to work a 12-step program and a lifetime to practice this, and I really believe that to be the case. Now, this particular share, responsible sponsorship versus codependent relationship, is a summation of my experience over 20 years of working with others. I have a disclaimer. Alcoholics, addicts are sensitive people, and it takes a long time to outgrow this serious handicap. Often, I'll rattle somebody with something I'll say, and then I got to retort with, whoa, hey, save it for your sponsor, which doesn't seem to alleviate their rancor or resentment when I rattle them. There's a passage in the big book that, by the way, comes from page 125 in the big book, Alcoholics Are Sensitive People. There's another on page 50. We talked of intolerance while we're intolerant ourselves, and I've been intolerant. I'm no saint. We miss the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of the trees. And that's the one great thing about the set-aside prayer. I'm sometimes accused of scaring people out of the rooms. I remember this woman came into a meeting we did. It was a midnight meeting. And she walks in. This is when I was doing in-person meetings, Silvio. And she sat down and she said, "Look what happened to me." And she opened up her blouse. And my jaw literally hit the table. She had stitches from one ear to the other and right across her chest, 75 stitches and staples. I said, "What happened to you?" She said, "I was at the crack house. This guy wanted the resin from my pipe. I told him to piss off. He pulled out a butcher knife, cut my throat from ear to ear, and gutted me like a fish. He's in jail for attempted murder. I just got out of the hospital, and Cameron, I want to go back to the crack house." Now, there ain't nothing I can say or do that's going to frighten this woman. So I always get a kind of a chuckle when we hand out the yellow card and, we try to make the rooms, palatable for the sensitive addict. I get into a lot of recovery controversies. Usually it's oddly enough, you would think I'd have the biggest controversies with treatment center people or counselors or status quo 12-steppers, but it's usually the other big book sponsors. They get a little nutty about their program. And not that it's strictly for big book thumpers, because I do run into counselors that get wound up and, meeting makers and that sort of thing. But I remember Mark Houston, great American sponsor, passed away in 2010, would tell this story. In 12 steps, what we're trying to do is discover a power greater than ourselves, which restores to sanity. And we got to climb this mountain to get to it. And as we're climbing the mountain, we have a mule to get us up the mountain. Now, there are meeting maker mules. There's 12 and 12 mules. There's big book mules. There's counseling mules. There's therapy mules. There's secular approach mules. And we're all climbing the mountain. And when we get to the top of the mountain, what do we want to do? Well, I want to commune with God. I want to commune with the divine. But sometimes I find some people, and big book thumpers can be part of this group, they don't want to commune with God. They want to brag about their mule, as their mule is the best mule for getting up the mountain. And they're so focused on their asses, they miss the experience with God. Mark Houston used to say, we don't worship the fingers that point to the power. I don't worship the big book. I don't worship my sponsor. I don't worship CA. I worship one power, and that's the divine consciousness, the power from within. The other caveat I think you'll find with big book sponsorship, because I'm a big book sponsor and I can be a big book thumper. I've been accused of being a page pusher, a step Nazi, a cult watch group in America defined me as the Canadian steptard. But you can take 10 different big book sponsors, ask them one question, you'll get 10 different answers. And that's not a bad thing. No one among us has a monopoly on recovery. And I've personally failed with hundreds of people who could not or would not see our way of life. So, I like to remember that our fellowship has many voices, and sometimes it takes a chorus to make a song of recovery. So I try to be tolerant and as open-minded as I can and, take it from there. Now, the theme of this share is responsible sponsorship versus codependent relationship. That title is always a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to make a case for sponsorship first, because everything's about sponsorship. Step 12 on page 60 says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry the message, the big book message that is, to the alcoholic or the addict and practice these principles in all our affairs. And by all our affairs, I practice the principle of my program with my family first, take care of what God is giving me. My job second, I need to be self-supporting so I can take care of family. And then in my spare time, part-time, as an avocation, I carry the message the addict still suffers. And I find that a good balanced program in my life. Page 89 goes on to say, practical experience shows us nothing will ensure immunity. Nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking, using, or acting out as intensive work with other addicts. It works when the other activities fail. When all the human secular activities failed to hold me in check, failed to give me a power for permanent abstinence, working with others always ensures that immunity. And that's our 12th suggestion. Carry the message to other addicts. Question is, are you willing to do that? If it only takes a day to learn the 12-step program, we should all be out there working it. If you've been in the program longer than 30 days and you're still not working with others, you need to write sloth down on your step 4, because that's a serious character defect. You can help when no one else can. We're like, the anthropologists refer to us as wounded healers. We've been in the hole. We've been down there. We found a way out. We've been wounded by our addiction and we have recovered. And that's what earns us the right to carry the message and how we're able to secure the confidence of another addict. Hey, I'm like you, you're like me, but you don't do it anymore. And I want what you got. And we can take them on that journey. One caveat, remember, they're losers. They're ill. In 20 years of working with others, I've been lied to, robbed, verbally abused, physically threatened, sexually harassed. My property's been damaged. My wife and kids terrorized. These are intense people we work with. So, you need to keep your wits about you. I often like to quote Matthew 10, verse 16. Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep amongst the wolves. Be wary like serpents, but gentle like doves, meaning keep your wits about you. Don't be inviting crackheads home to meet mom or the wife or the spouse. Nothing good's going to happen from that. So keep our wits about us. When I work with others, I always like, if I'm working in person, I like to work in a public place for their protection, my protection. And I love Zoom because buffered by this medium, it's a much safer environment. And as I said, I've worked with all kinds of addicts, and I've worked with all sorts of gender and, like men, women, transgenders, non-binaries, blacks, whites, Jews, Christians, etc. In our big book, it's in the doctor's opinion, this seemed to prove that one addict could affect another as no non-addict could. It also indicated strenuous work one addict with another was vital to permanent recovery. Again, they're making a case for sponsorship. I soon found out, page 15, when all other measures failed, the human, the secular, work with another alcoholic would save the day. The broker, that's Bill W. and the early old timers, they had worked hard with many alcoholics, addicts on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but succeeded in only keeping sober themselves. And they suddenly realized in order to save themselves, they must carry their message to another alcoholic. the power is always in carrying the message to another person. I don't have the power to sober up the newcomer. If I did, I would, but I don't. But I know that in my willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness to carry the message to those that suffer, my sobriety always gets taken care of. And it's been 100% successful in my life for 20-something years. We have been given the power to help others. We have recovered, not recovering, but recovered. And given the power to help others. We heal the seemingly hopeless. Like, we heal the seemingly hopeless. Everyone's failed the addict. But, friends, families, employers, the medical community, the religious community, the treatment center community, yet we as lay addicts, armed with the facts about ourselves, our common solution, a generosity of spirit, we heal the seemingly hopeless. And lastly, on page 102, if you're shaky, you better work with another alcoholic instead. So my spiritual prescription for alcoholics who are shaky, take 2 big books, 1 newcomer, call me in the morning. That's my prescription. Okay, case for sponsorship. So I was saying to Sylvia before we got started, I'm often asked, how much time do I have? And I always reply, well, why is that important? And often they say, oh, I understand you don't have a lot of time. I didn't say that. I just want to know why time is so important. Well, it tells me how long you've been sober. Yeah, well, that might tell you how long I'm sober for, but that's not necessarily indicative of the quality of my program. And I've met a lot of people with 5, 10, 15, 20 years sobriety, and whatever they got, I don't want it. They're nuts. They're insane. They're miserable. They're crazy, right? I find a much more important question is this. Are you working with newcomers? And when they say, yeah, I'm working with newcomers, man, that tells me everything about their program. Because if you're working with others, that tells me you're working a 12-step program. Because if you're not working your own 12 steps, you won't sustain working with others. As I said, these are intense people to work with. There's really nothing in it working directly with the newcomer. God requires me to give unconditionally in my love and attention to those that suffer. And in doing so, he takes care of my sobriety out of left field. That's why it's not a selfish program. I hear people say, oh, it's a selfish program. Got to work on me first, but they never hang around the rooms long. It's about being unselfish. The other thing I often sometimes hear a sponsor say, well, I'll work with you, but I don't give a damn if you sober up or not. I really don't care about you. I'm only doing this because it's helpful to me. And I go, what a dick. Like, that's a real dick thing to say. Even Bill and Bob mentioned a vision for you. Yes, we realize that by helping others, it's going to save us, but that motive was secondary. The primary motive was always to be of maximum service to God and our fellow human beings and to give unconditionally and carry the message to the addict that still suffers. Our forward in the second edition makes the case of the alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. 50% got sober up once and remained that way. They recovered and remained recovered. And 25% sobered up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those that stayed on showed improvement. So we got a 75% success rate there. And what's great about those that come in and think, oh, I don't really want it. God stuff, helping others. I don't think so. Thousands came. But what happened is they went back out, tried it their way, failed and came back in. 2 out of 3 failed and came back, said, okay, I think I'm ready to work the program. When I went back to university in my 50s, there's a line in the big book, go out and see what other religious people are doing. And being the typical addict, I thought, well, I'll go get a degree in religions. So I enrolled in the University of Toronto, the 10th ranked Ivy League university in the world, did a degree in medical anthropology and religions. By the way, 3 real good predictors of recovery. 1, we work with others. 2, go back to school, improve ourselves. You know what the third thing we do that really shows you got a good program? We fix our teeth, because nobody's got money for teeth when we're out there, right? We fix our teeth. So if you're fixing your teeth, going back to school and working with others, man, you got a golden program. So I'm doing medical anthropology, which is the study of humans and their healing systems, and 12 Steps is an alternative healing system. And I was writing a paper, and I came across this Baltimore, Maryland drug study where they had 500 injection drug users in the year 2000, and they followed their trajectory into the rooms of AA and NA. They had 3 groups, with sponsors, without sponsors, and those that sponsored others. And at the end of 1 year, they looked at their abstinent rates. Those that were not sponsored, 44.7% were still sober. Those that were sponsored, only 39% were still sober. Having a sponsor was not associated with any kind of sustained abstinence. One of the things I tell the newcomer, I'm not the power. I will fail you. I'll say something to piss you off, or I won't be there when you need me the most. But those that sponsored others, year 2000, 75% were still sober. The statistics I read earlier were 50% got sober at once and 25 after some relapses. Those are the stats they did on the AA meetings back in the early 40s. So we see a consistent abstinent rate of 75%. Helping others, helping the newcomer is the foundation stone of a recovery. A kindly act once in a while isn't enough. What do sponsors talk about? We talk about newcomers relapsing. So I need to get the newcomer through the steps as quickly as I can so that they can enjoy the same liberty and freedom from active addiction as I have. First 88 pages of your big book, it mentions 124 times work with another alcoholic. And they don't mean your sponsor. They mean work with the guy or the gal that's in the hole, doesn't know their way out, and show them a way out. You know, as sponsors, what are we like? You know, we are like spiritual pimps. That's our role. We're spiritual pimps. We carry the message. We broker a spiritual relationship with the prospect and God. I go, dickweed, God, dickweed. That's my only job, is to broker that relationship. Anything more, and then I'm carrying the addict and not the message. The message is how to establish a relationship with God. The Jews call it the Torah. Christians call it the New Testament. Addicts, we call it the 12 steps. These are approaches for brokering a relationship with a divine consciousness that we can tap, that's far greater than ourselves, far greater than the drugs, far greater than the alcohol, far greater than the acting out addictions. And as I said earlier, it's not a selfish program. We get to keep it by giving it away. We pay it forward. When I take people through the steps, I do it like a co-sponsor because I'm seeking the power too. I'm seeking the power right now. So when I do the journey with the newcomer, it's arm in arm, brother and brother, brother and sister. And we go together. They work their steps. I work my step. We share our experience, and the power of the program is always in the sharing of two addicts working together. And when they find the power, I find the power, we light up together. And that's an experience you don't want to miss. Lack of power, that's my dilemma. My job is to get the newcomer through the steps as quickly as possible. So how do I win the newcomer's confidence? 3 ways we do that. Page 18 of our big book, But the Ex-Problem Drinker. We're ex-problem addicts. That's very compelling to someone who wants to stop but can't stop, who has a solution, our recovery recipe, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and is properly armed with the facts about themselves, can generally win the entire confidence of another addict in a few hours. Those are the 3 things that allow us to win. Hey, I'm like you, you're like me, but you don't do it anymore, and I want what you got. And until that understanding is reached, very little can be accomplished, if not nothing. So if they don't want to stop, now if you find someone and you find them in the rooms, there are a lot of tire kickers in the rooms. If they don't want to stop drinking, using, or acting out, don't waste time trying to persuade them. You might spoil a later opportunity. Most alcoholics, page 43, says we have to be pretty badly mangled before we commence to solve our problems. Page 48 goes on to say alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. When I came in November 21st, 2003, I was badly mangled. I'd been beaten into a state of reasonableness. Page 94, the more hopeless they feel, the better. They'll be more likely to follow your suggestions. I sometimes pull a couple of rungs out on the ladder so they hit bottom harder, because that's to our advantage. The more hopeless they feel, the better. They're more likely to do what it is. Hey, I got a way out, but you got to do it. Now, if you're working, and this is, depending on who you're working with, it goes on to say in our big book on Roman numerals XXV II, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who's very jittery or befogged. It's imperative that their brain be cleared before they're approached. They have a better chance of understanding, accepting what we have to offer. When I'm working with substance abusers, the first question I ask when someone approaches me, do you honestly want to stop? Not just quit one day at a time, honestly want to stop for good. And if the answer is yes, 2, when was the last time you drank, used, or acted out? Now, with drugs and alcohol, I like at least 5 to 7 days sobriety, sometimes a little longer for opiate addiction, depending on the severity of the body illness as they detox. Acting out addictions, there's a lot of discussion around that. But again, 5-7 days is usually a good benchmark. So honest desire to stop, they're detoxed, their brains are clear, and then rigorous application of our 12-step program. Page 90 says, if they've decided you want what we have, which is a recovery recipe, and are willing to go to any length to get it, to follow the recipe, then they're ready to take certain steps. And on page 58, it says, ask the newcomer if they want to quit for good. And would they go to any extreme to do so? Now, by any extreme, I mean, will you thoroughly follow the instructions in the big book? That's all I ask of them, nothing more. And if they say yes, then their attention should be drawn to you, who is someone who has recovered. So instructions for responsible sponsorship and avoiding codependent relationships. Page 98 in your big book. It's not a matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give. That often makes the difference between failure and success. The minute we put our work on the service plane, i.e. we carry the alcoholic and not the message, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our human assistant rather than upon God. And that's dangerous because I will fail them. Now, I believe codependency is the underpinning problem in all the fellowship. Codependents are irresponsible in their relationships as they blame others for how they think, feel, and behave. And they try to change others on how they think, feel, and behave because the codependent's battle cry is this: I need you to change how you think, feel, and behave so I can feel okay about myself. Look at United States. You got two factions, the Democrats and the Republicans, and each side is going, I'll be happy when you change. And look at the shit show that's going on down there, a divided country. And that's that codependent behavior. And I see this attitude manifest a lot in sponsorship styles. So let's look at them. Let's look at the different types of codependent sponsors. We got the Care Bear sponsor. I'm going to love you into recovery. I'm going to love you until you love yourself. Hell, the love of my own wife and kids couldn't keep me sober. You think the love or a hug from some dickweed in the program's going to do it? Like, give your head a shake. These codependent care. I'm going to love you. I'm going to love. Yeah, love is nice, but that's not going to keep me sober. Then you got the recovery bullies. Hey, it's my job to manage your life because you can't. Most sponsors are nuts. Do you really want someone insane running your life? Think about that. Take the cotton out of your ears and shove it in your mouth, I hear a lot. Call me every day so I can micromanage your recovery. Hell, if everyone I carried the message to, and it's over 12,000 people now, called me every day, I'd be drinking a 40-pounder bottle of bourbon right this moment. You're not ready for the steps. Come and see me when you're 90 days sober. Hell, if I could sober up for 90 days, what the fuck do I need you for? Like, oh my God. Remember, no major decisions for the first year in recovery. I hear that in treatment centers. No major decisions. Step 1. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, drugs, or acting out behaviors. Our lives become unmanageable. Major decision. Step 2, come to believe in a power greater than ourselves to restore us to sanity. Major decision. Turn my will and my life over to God as I understand it. Major decision. Every one of our 12 steps is a major bloody decision. And then lastly, firing the addict for missing an appointment, for relapsing. In the treatment centers, here in Canada, we have treatment centers that are co-ed, untreated alcoholic addicts. Right? They're barely toilet trained apes. They eat, they shit, they fuck. That's all they know how to do. And then they put them into a room together and say, you can't sleep with the other participants. And then they find two of them going at one another under the stairwell and they throw them out. And the poor addict is bewildered and go, why are you throwing me out? Well, you can't follow the rules. Well, if I could follow the fucking rules, I wouldn't be here in the first place. Oh my God, these people are nuts. What do you mean follow the rules? They're insane. Oh my God. Anyhow, the codependent sponsee. I don't make any decisions till I talk to my sponsor. My sponsors make all my decisions for me. I need someone who can hold me accountable to call me on my shit. That's not what I do. I carry a message, how to broker a relationship with the one who's got all the power. I go to the meeting and I go to the meetings my sponsor tells me to go. I usually recommend better meetings than others, but I don't require them, It's like Mark Houston used to say, when you don't care, I can't. When you do care, I must. That's kind of my border. And for those of you that suffer codependence, working with others is a great way to judge and qualify your recovery as a codependent, because the codependent wants to fix the other person. But when you're applying the recipe of our program, it requires you to have very specific boundaries and to learn how to develop healthy, independent and interdependent relationships. My sponsor handles every aspect of my program, my relationships, my job, my family matters. Now, page 18 and 19 says the person who's making the approaches had the same difficulty. Take care of your brothers and sisters. We approach the addict that still suffers. We approach them. They don't know who to work with. I remember working with a crystal meth addict out of Houston. She called me up crying, and I go, what's going on? She goes, I went to my AA meeting, and the men are hitting on me, and they're touching me inappropriately. And I'm going, where are your sisters protecting you? Look out for your brothers and sisters out there. That the people obviously know what they're talking about. Their whole department shouts at the prospect that they're a person with a real answer. They walk their talk physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Not sobriety, not in sobriety with 5, 10 years, whatever they got. I don't want it, right? We walk our talk. You know, when someone comes up to me and says, Cameron, I'm very spiritual, my red flags go off. It's like in business. When a guy comes up to me and says, Cameron, I want you to know I've got lots of integrity in business. I make that person pay cash. They have no attitude of holier than thou. We're not saints, preachers, crusaders, or mission makers. I meet a lot of saints and virgins in the rooms out there. I'm no saint. I'm not here to preach. And I don't think any alcoholic or addict wants or desires to hear a sermon or some self-righteous dickweed, pontificate about their way is the only way. Nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful. When you don't care, I can't. When you do care, I must. So there are no fees to pay. Now look at our business. We got recovery coaches, big money in recovery coaching, especially if you're doing it for the elites and the celebrities out there. You got treatment centers, multi-billion-dollar treatment centers, big pharma, right? Big pharma and all their pharmaceutical interventions. Bill was really smart in saying you can't mix the spiritual with the material. It skews the agenda. It taints the relationship. No axes to grind, no windy arguments or frothy debates. I have an understanding with one addict with another addict. Are you willing to show up and do the work? Are you willing to answer questions honestly with a simple yes or no? Watch out for the maybes and the yeah buts. And can you be open-minded and lay aside any prejudices? Experience the program, assess the results for yourself. However, not so open-minded that your brains fall out. When I know I don't know, then I know I'm ready to know. And no people to please. There's no ass kissing or groveling, right? I knew a woman called me up. She was angry at her sponsor. I said, what's going on? She said, my sponsor told me in order to recover, I had to clean his house twice a week. Now, Dr. Bob did say clean house, but I don't think he meant it quite that way, right? And you get a lot of that craziness going on. There's no ass kissing or groveling. And lastly, no lectures to be endured. We're not here to run your life. I'm not here to micromanage your program. There are no contracts to be signed, no rules to follow. You're perfectly free to try it your way if you want. I had a friend of mine, he was a Mohawk Indian, and he'd be working a guy through the big book, and the guy would start arguing with some aspect on a certain page. He'd rip the page right out of the big book. Says, well, I guess we don't need that page. Let's try it your way. Right. These are the conditions we found most effective, and after such an approach, many of us take up our beds and walk again. So, just wrapping up here, Silvio, a vision for you. Thus we grow. The business of addiction is booming, folks. We could certainly use the help on the firing lines of recovery. Remember, it only takes a day to learn how to work it and a lifetime to practice it. Ebby Thatcher was 60 days sober when he carried the message to Bill W. Dr. Bob was 2 weeks sober when he carried the message to Bill Dotson, AA number 3. Bill W. was 7 days sober when he detoxed and went frantically looking for other alcoholics to work with. They all worked it quickly. Lack of power, that's our dilemma. So reach out to the newcomer. You're not going to fuck them up any more than they're already fucked up. So throw them a bone. You just might save a soul. And remember, you have your script. You have your big book narrative, or if you work out of the 12 steps, 4 hours workbook, you have a narrative. You have your experiences and the newcomer has theirs. And you bring those 3 elements together in an atmosphere of willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. You can watch a miracle occur. You know, our 12th step comes from the book of James 5, 19 to 20. My brothers and sisters, if anyone should lose their way to the truth, that is God, the divine, and another, such as a sponsor, should show you the way, that person, the way back to the truth. That person not only saves the soul, but covers a multitude of sin. So thus life will take on new meaning, and to watch newcomers recover, to see newcomers help newcomers, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship of big book sponsors grow up about you, to have a host of big book sponsor friends. This is an experience you must not miss. Frequent contact with newcomers and each other's is the bright spot of our lives. And I'm for that. How about you? Thank you so much.
Boom. Mic drop. Cameron, thank you so much. I mean, I love the passion that you bring to this and the wonderful humor you've brought to this. I can't thank you enough. A quick reminder for our live audience here. If you have a question for Cameron, please type it into the chat of the meeting. If you wish to remain anonymous and not have me read your first name, please make a note of that in your question. We'll come to that in a moment. Now, as I said, you bring a lot of humor to this, but I could very much sense the seriousness of how you feel about this, the seriousness of our disease, and the seriousness of how much you value working with others. You spoke of the incredible list of different addicts and alcoholics that you work with. You mentioned pretty much every drug or behavior out there. How does your approach differ when you work with those people with different addictions, if it does? But how, I'm assuming it does.
No, that's a good question. Now, the general program is the same for everyone, but on step one, I remember I worked with an under earner. I'd never even heard of this addiction pattern. I didn't understand it. So in step one, where it says, share with the newcomer your habits, symptoms, and experiences, and get them to share their experiences too. I just asked them, tell me what an under-earning spree looks like. Give me your habits, symptoms, experience. And they educate me about their particular addiction pattern. And I learn a lot of what working with different addicts. And that just makes me more useful as a sponsor. I understand under-earning to a large degree now. I didn't really understand hoarding or cutting, but that was a fascinating addiction to work with. Hoarders and clutterers, they assign insane values to things because in their mind, they think sometime in the future, they're going to need that item. And if they don't have it, it's going to have serious consequences. So they attach an insane value and they hoard it. They hold on to it. It's kind of a really twisted form of commodity fetishism. Yeah. But yeah, that's the approach I take. That's the only difference in the program is in the first part of step one, understanding their addiction pattern. And then the rest of the program is the same for everybody because it's all about the same approach to brokering a relationship with the one who has all the power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I assume you also define sobriety then slightly different for different folks.
Yeah. Like with the food addictions, you got to eat. So it's about removing the desire to either eat too much. See, the key is removing the desire. It's not about control or diet or abstinent or I'll only drink on the weekends and not during the week, all this sort of these different patterns of trying to control. It's about brokering a relationship with one who has the power. And when I'm connected to that power, it's so infinite, it's so broad, it's so powerful that my desire to drink or use isn't there. And so with food, it's like the desire to eat unhealthy foods. Like even though I'm not a food addict, I'm very cognizant about my physical body. I think of it like a temple for God. And if I'm going to grow God within this temple, God does not dwell in a polluted temple. So I'm mindful about what I consume now. Not too many sugars, not too much starch-based, glucose-based, foods and gluten foods. I try to eat healthier. So my body is more energetic, more vibrant, more conducive to connecting and growing that divine spirit. So there, and with codependence, we still have relationships, but it's about moving away from trying to fix you to developing a sense of autonomy and independence so that when you enter into a relationship, you're interdependent. Each side comes together, sharing strengths and weaknesses. And in that interdependence, the whole is greater than the two halves. And that's a really cool and exciting relationship to be a part of. So that's kind of how I handle the boundaries.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Cameron. We have an anonymous question here, please, which I'm going to read. I am abstinent, but often find myself in states of anxiety, feeling frozen, unable to take simple action on my job, and get overwhelmed and stressed about everyday things. Can you share any experience, strength, and hope you have on this? Thank you for this question.
Fear inventories. I love doing fear inventory. Now, anxiety is a general sense of fear. Now, if you can pause and reflect or meditate or center yourself and try and ascertain what's the underpinning fear that's driving this emotional shutdown, either in procrastination or avoidance or just a general sense of, being stopped short in life, and identify the fear and then work it out as an inventory. Like, I have this tremendous fear of institutional authority. And when I started doing fear inventories, and when COVID hit, man, that was really exacerbated by the lockdowns and the police and, all the craziness that went on in the early part of the pandemic. And I was getting homicidal. I was ready to commit homicide. My anger was so much, but I had to realize that underpinning that anger was the fear of institutional authority. And so I started teasing it out. What's my primary motive here? Well, I want to be autonomous. I want to be left alone. I don't want to be overly taxed. I don't want the government telling me what to do. And I look at that self-seeking motive that keeps my hands around their throat. And I realize, that's a pretty futile, fatal, and self-destructive motive to hang on to, because they're not going to change. They're going to go on doing what they're going to do. And that fear of institutional authority is there because these are primary values. My freedom is a primary value in my life. So, and then other defects start kicking in. I get really irresponsible. I blame the government. I get into vulgar language and immoral thinking, and I slander and I gossip and I vilify. And, and all these character defects come out. And then I start cheating on my taxes. I start practicing civil disobedience. Oh, you say I got to be locked down, can't go outside? You just watch how I go outside and go wherever I like. And I literally, and this is what's called paradoxical intention, I literally create an individual that will bring institutional authority right to my doorstep and fulfill my fear of that manifestation of fear. So fear inventory really enlightens me as to what I'm doing. So the answer is always in God's will. So instead of fear, it's faith in God's wisdom and power, courage to be the man I'm meant to be honest, to be a responsible man, to look for the good in things. As much as I dislike police officers, they still do a lot of good work out there. And, and I get proactive, I get centered. And I ask myself this question: when I'm centered, when I'm donning the mantle of God and I'm in that position of neutrality, safe and protected, and the fear is dissipated, the question I ask myself is, how do I find freedom in an unfree world? And I start thinking proactively and solution-oriented, as opposed to being fear and reactive and victimized and manifesting the very fear that I'm so afraid of. Gee, I hope that's a lot, but I hope that was helpful.
Quite a lot to unpick there. Thank you, Cameron. Brilliant. I've got another question here, anonymous. If I haven't finished... I assume it's all right. Oh, I see. If I haven't finished the first round of steps, what are your thoughts regarding sponsoring? My sponsor believes I should at least finish one round. I have many addictions and I'm free from some, but some are still a challenge. What are your thoughts for sponsoring any addiction? Should you do the steps in each program or address all character defects at the same time?
Well,
there's a couple of questions in there.
That's a good question. It's got a number of facets to it. So I take an any and all addiction approach. I'm convinced, and have shown in my own life, that as long as I'm continuously trying to cleave to that divine power within me and do God's will rather than Cameron's will, a lot of these problematic addiction patterns, not only drugs and alcohol, but eating bad foods, smoking. I stopped smoking along with drinking and using. And I believe a lot of them will dissipate when we're doing God's will rather than our will. So I take an any and all inclusive addiction approach right off the hop and start and believing that is by that spiritual relationship that I'm able to overcome any compulsive desire to drink, use, or act out. Now, as far as the program goes, and you see, I take the premise that it only takes a day to learn it. So anyone can start working their program with others almost immediately. If you read some of the old grapevine articles of AA back in the early 40s, you know, there's stories in there where people started working with others just by greeting people at the door and trying to be helpful and welcoming. So the whole emphasis was to take the emphasis off self and put it on being others. It's about being helpful to others. It's a primary spiritual principle, to be unselfish and to be helpful to others. Because when I'm focused on me, Sylvia, if I focus on me today, I can think of a half a dozen or a dozen things or more that either I'm not getting or I should be getting, and I start getting restless and irritable and discontented, and, you know, and I get wound up, and then that activates that liar in my head that says, hey, we should grab a bottle of bourbon and some cocaine. And that's not good. But when I'm focused on you, when I'm focused here on the meeting, and I'm focused about carrying a message to those of you that are looking to improve and to learn and to break through and so forth, I'm not focused on Cameron. I'm focused on being of maximum service to God and my fellow human beings. How can I be helpful to my wife? How can I be helpful to my children? How can I be helpful to the people in the room? How can I be helpful to my neighbors, the people in public, et cetera, et cetera? It's always the focus is out. I'm pushing out here. I look out here for how can I be helpful, and I look in here for what needs to be changed within myself so that I have a greater relationship with the one who has all the power. So start being helpful immediately.
Thank you. Thank you, Cameron. To our live audience, if you want to send in another question for Cameron, we have another 10 minutes or so. I've got a few more questions for you, Cameron. There's so much in there in the things that you said. I wrote down quite a few. You said that you do a 12-step in 4 hours workshop, if I understood this correctly. Can you just give us a couple of minutes or so on how that works? If you can summarize this maybe in a few sentences.
Sure. Well, what I did when I first started working with others, like when I was first shown how to work my steps, we started at the title page of the big book, and we sequentially worked through the first 88 pages. And the way they did it was you'd learn the first 11 steps. They didn't bother with the working with others chapter. They said, go teach what I've just shown you to other people. And I got that, but it took about 3 to 4 months for me to learn the program. And then when I started working with others, they were relapsing by the time I got the Bill story, or there was more about alcoholism. I thought, how do I break through that? How do I give people a lick of the ice cream cone? And I met Wally P. out of Arizona, who does the Back to Basics program, where they looked at taking the newcomer through the 12 steps in 4 one-hour sessions of the early 40s. And Wally was saying you can show the person the power within a few short hours. And I thought if I could give a person connected to that power a lick of the ice cream cone, they might just have a fighting chance. So what I did, and similar to Wally's insights and intel by interviewing a lot of the early AA members when they were alive, that there were certain instructions in the big book. The big book solution is 164 pages, but at that 134 of those pages is commentary. There are roughly 30 pages of instructions on how to do the steps. So I extrapolated those instructions, those 30 pages, laid it out in a workbook, and made it a much simpler, easy to grasp approach to working a 12-step program, a recipe for finding that divine power deep down within themselves. And I found it very effective. And I see the recovery rates. I keep track of everyone I carry the message to. I notice that the people who do what I do and work their program and be helpful to others, they're all sober. But the ones that don't, they either MIA or they end up dead. My business card, by the way, I order these from a morgue supply house in Kentucky. I order toe tags from the morgue. And I have my contact information on the back, and I hand them toe tags. That's my introduction to the newcomer.
Love your humor. We've got 3 more questions here, so let's try and address these quickly before we close. This one's anonymous. Can you talk about your experience of issues in the workplace? How do you know when it's you that needs to change versus the job?
Well, I'm always the one I'm always the one that has to change, because if I start trying to change everything outside myself, I get really codependent and resentful quickly. Now, I have an approach in the workplace, and I use this in life too. There's a time to fight, there's a time to yield, and there's a time to walk away. And the wisdom is knowing which is the right application. And that's what I love about the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, which is anything outside myself, and the courage to change the things I can, which is everything within myself. So I'm always looking at, what do I need to change in relation to this context I find myself in?
Thank you. Another one that we have. When you have Anonymous again, when you have taken a person through the steps, are you done with sponsoring that person?
Yeah, I pretty much cut them loose. I wean them off the tit right away, because they'll suckle my ethereal tit dry. Like, my titties are really worn down, so I try to wean them off the tit pretty quickly. Now, I say, if you got some step 5 stuff you want to go over, I love to hear from, your experiences of working with others, or maybe you have a question about working with a particular newcomer. I invite those questions, but for the most part, I remove the excuse they don't know how in a 7 to 10 day one-on-one approach to working the 12 steps. And I cut them loose. I get them out there working with others, because that's where the power is.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think we can fit this one in as well before we close. Again, Anonymous, do you have any thoughts on how I can best fit myself to be helpful to those who have been in the rooms for years, but aren't working a program and seem to be struggling week after week? Would you try to win their confidence the same as you would someone at their first meeting?
You know what? I've met a lot of people like that. One man comes to mind here locally. He's just a miserable sot. Like, he's just miserable living life in sobriety, and he has no desire to change. I don't even think he sees it. I call them waste of fucking times. They're just not open to any other insight. But I've had lots of people come to me with 5, 10, 15 years of sobriety, literally suicidal. And the suicide rates in 12 steps are 80 times higher than normal society. An untreated alcoholic addict is 80 times more likely to take their life in the first 5 years of abstinence, because they don't know how to live with it anymore, but they don't know how to live without it. And they go into sobriety and they go insane and they take their own lives. I have 9 people commit suicide. A lot of them are in so much pain, and they see me working it, and my excitement and my enthusiasm, which is at an all-time high for CA 20 years in, they go, I don't know what you got, Cameron, but I'd sure like a piece of it. I go, let me show you how to work a real program. And that's how I work with those that are been around the rooms a long, long time that are suffering.
That's great. Thank you so much, Cameron. It was an absolutely brilliant meeting today. Thank you for a fantastic Recode 12 weekly speaker meeting. Now, if we missed your question or if you have more, consider joining our WhatsApp community. Email recode12pod@gmail.com to join the conversation. And if you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. It's a powerful way to work Step 12. And if you would like to be considered as a future Recode 12 speaker, please send an email to recode12pod@gmail.com and we can get it set up. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with Cameron reciting the Serenity Prayer.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to pop, by the way, in the chat, Silvio, my contact details for the workshop on Sunday, if anyone wants to come out and learn 12 steps in 4 hours. As I said, the we version of the Serenity Prayer is my favorite. It bears witness to what we do together that we can't do on our own. So I love the we version of the Serenity Prayer. So, God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, and the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God bless you on the firing lines of recovery.
Thank you again, Cameron. It was an absolutely fantastic meeting. There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it, you are worth it.
And I took a page out of your heart, a great place for a broken man like me to start. start. And every time I see that halo in the sky, I warm my bones in the sun. I placed a bookmark in my life, so I'd remember how to stay close to the light. The youthful sympathy in a child's eyes. I warm my bones in the sun. I warm my bones in the sun. Fires blaze and rivers maze, and I come winding back to you. And people lie and curtains cry, a beauty born out of the blue. I'd give anything to you. You are my peace in times of war. I never had someone truly see me before. A beauty born out of despair. I warm my bones in the sun. I warm my bones in the sun. Fires blaze, rivers maze, and I come winding back to you. People lie, curtains cry, beauty born out of the blue. Well, I'd give anything to you. And all of a sudden, life seems so true. Fires blaze, rivers maze, and I come winding back to you.